Well, a big hello to my now former fellow citizens of Rhea County, Tennessee. And more specifically, I would like to address this to the Sheriff of Rhea County, Mike Neal. Hello, Sheriff Neal. My name is Tim Corbin, and I was a resident of Rhea County for a little more than 10 years. By the time you see this, I am a former Rhea County resident. However, as I am making this video right now, I am still in my Rhea County home. I've sold it recently and I'm due to move out of here in less than a week, but by the time this gets posted, I will be a former resident. And just to tell you a little bit about my background as I address this to Sheriff Neal, I wanted people to know that I am a sheriff's child, so to speak. Well, I was born and raised in Southern California, where my mother was a sheriff's office administrator and put in a career on the force, as did her second husband, my stepfather, whom I lived with during my high school years, put in a career on the force, as did one of my stepbrothers and many of our friends and relatives and neighbors around us. I grew up surrounded by sheriff's officials. Very often I would find myself sitting at a table full of them, hearing their war stories, hearing cop talk. They love to talk about their job and their work and their experiences. And as a matter of fact, as I think about it, on a few occasions I actually went out on ride-alongs with some of them and actually got to witness firsthand these men doing their jobs. And so the point that I'm trying to make with all this is that if anybody knows and understands and appreciates and respects the work that you men do, our law enforcement officials, you can put me at the top of that list. I have always had the utmost respect for our law enforcement officials, and more specifically, sheriff's officers, since I grew up in that environment. And so with that in mind, Sheriff Neal, I would like to ask you a series of questions that I'm hoping that you could respond to. I'm sure that somebody will alert you to this posting, and I'm hoping that you can give your own posting and response, either as a video like I'm doing or through some other electronic documentation. But I'd like to ask you some questions that I'd hope that you can address for us. Questions that I think not just myself, but the rest of your citizens in your county would be interested in hearing. And now these questions, it has to do with civil rights and citizens' rights. And the fact that I grew up on the right side of the law, and I've always been on the right side of the law, it's something that I never really took the time to study up much on what the Constitution says and the amendments. You know, I don't know, maybe I just felt that as long as I live on the right side of the law, my rights will never be violated, and you can call that ignorance on my part, I guess. But I just never really felt the need to know. So I know that a lot of citizens are very vague on these issues, and these are things that I know that I could address these to an attorney. However, these particular questions that I wanted to ask has to do with citizens' rights when they are confronted by law enforcement, anytime they're being questioned or anything like that. And so therefore I felt, Sheriff Neal, you would be the proper man to address these questions to. And so the first question that I would like to ask you about, I know that while I was living in Rhea County, the local newspaper there, over the years I would read these articles about arrests that were made at people's houses, and it would oftentimes say that although there was no arrest warrant in place, officers still made a successful arrest after they conducted what's called a knock-and-talk visit. And I always thought, like, that sounds a whole lot simpler than I'm sure it is, a knock-and-talk visit. I'm sure that you don't just go knock on somebody's door and say, hey, we think you committed a crime, and they say, yeah, I did, handcuff me, arrest me, take me away. Nobody wants to be arrested, so I can't imagine that it would be that simple. So that would be my first question to you, Sheriff Neal. I'm hoping that you could address this. Is if you could explain to us exactly what is a knock-and-talk visit, and exactly how is it that they are conducted, and how is it that this is such a successful arsenal that the Sheriff's Department has that they could use to make successful arrests when they don't have a warrant. So if you could address that, how are these knock-and-talk visits conducted? And now actually, for the citizens in Rhea County, I have something better. While we await Sheriff Neal's response, and I know we're all looking forward to that, but actually I have something better than anything that he can say in regards to that, and that is that I have a first-person account, and that first person, you're looking at him. During my time in Rhea County, actually it was very early, I'd only been living there a little over a year, I think, but some sheriff's officials came to my house and they conducted what's called a knock-and-talk visit. So maybe if I just explain the experience that I had, that will answer that question. I do want my former fellow citizens there in Rhea County, those of you who are still there, I do want you to keep one thing in mind. As I tell this story and as I explain these experiences that I had, please keep in mind that what happened to me can happen to any one of you. So just please keep that in mind as I explain to you what happened on the night that I had this knock and talk visit. And this particular knock and talk experience that I had, this took place back in August of 2004. It was almost 10 years ago. And at that time, a couple of things that I need to point out here. I'd only been living here for a little over a year. That's when I bought the home and excavated the land and set it up here. But over that time, very rarely was I ever here. I know that at that time I was working as an over-the-road truck driver. And anybody who knows truckers knows that rarely are they ever home. And when I wasn't trucking, when I was between those jobs, I would occasionally take temporary jobs that were in other regions where I would have to temporarily relocate for a while. And so the point that I'm making with all this is, on this night in question, at least the 5 months prior to that time, if you counted up the total number of days that I had been home in those 5 months, you could count them on your fingers. You know, it was just a day or two sporadically here and there is all, you know. But rarely was I ever here. And also something I need to point out here was that at that time, the mobile home park that I live in was, sheriff's presence here was not all that uncommon. I rarely was I home, but even when I was here, I would occasionally see cops within the mobile home park here. And I know that one of the neighbors, he got arrested for, I think he had a meth lab in his home there, and I don't know, just all kinds of crazy stuff going on here. Most of it I would hear about. I had some cousins who lived here at that time, and after I'd been away for long periods, I would come in and they would always say, like, you wouldn't believe what you missed while you were gone. Just a few weeks ago, this place was swarming with cops, you know. So anyway, at that time, there was a lot of problems here. Unfortunately, I guess that was weeded out over the years, but that was my situation. This environment here, rarely was I ever here, and there was a lot of screwed up police activity going on around here. Now, on this particular night in August 2004, it was the latter part of the week. I came in, I'd been gone all week, and one of the first things that I did was I called my cousin and left him a message. My cousin, who lived here at that time, was a real computer geek. He knew all about them. He had a room full of computers and always had a bunch of his computer geek friends there playing on them, you know. But, you know, I grew up in the typewriter era, so I'm still pretty illiterate with computers. But anytime I had a technical problem, I'd call him, and either he would come up, or if he was busy, he'd send one of his friends up. So that's what happened. I came in, I unloaded, I called him and left him a message and said I'll be here till tomorrow. I got some computer problems. Well, about 10 minutes after I left that message, I got a knock at my back door. And so I, of course, thinking, there's my computer help now. Well, when I opened the door, it wasn't my cousin, and I wasn't sure if it was one of his friends. Maybe I hadn't met him yet or not, but he was a little short guy, maybe stood 5.5 feet tops. You know, that's the first thing I noticed about him, is that he was a real little short guy. But the man introduced himself to me. He said, and I quote him exactly word for word, he said, "Hi, I'm Mike Bice." And so, of course, I introduced myself to him and shook his hand and welcomed him in and showed him my computer. I said, "Yeah, it's over here." And well, now, once he was inside, as I was reaching out to close my door, I noticed 2 uniformed sheriff's officers making their way towards me. They were coming in from the front of my house in my driveway area. I guess maybe they were peeking around the corner or something. But anyway, they were both in uniform. And now those 2 men, Sheriff Mike Neal, you were one of those men, and your partner with you there was your right-hand man, Chief Deputy John Argo. And so that would make this even more valid to address this to you. But I would ask you if you remember being at my house and meeting me, but I know that that's been almost 10 years ago, and I know you've been to a lot of your citizens' homes before, so I take it you wouldn't recollect it at this point. But as I continue to describe the details, though, I'm sure something will jog your memory. Anyway, the first emotion that hit me when I saw these sheriff's officers coming in was, I thought, okay, it was, you know, I kind of felt fear. I thought, maybe my visitor isn't here to fix my computer. Is he just some local lunatic running from the cops and trying to seek refuge in my house? Am I about to get caught up in a gun battle here, you know? And so I turned to Mike Bice, who's now several feet inside my house. I turned to him and I said, "Are you aware there's a couple other guys outside?" I didn't say they were cops because I didn't know what he knew and what he didn't. But anyway, he acknowledged that he was aware of them, and he said that they were with him. And so then, of course, I felt a lot of relief. Okay, everything's cool, no gun battle here. So Anyway, they came in, and I figured they probably just want to ask me about one of my lunatic neighbors who I know nothing about, but I'll answer whatever questions I can. But let me stop there and ask you, Sheriff Neal, this will be my second question to you. Your detective, Mike Bice, was in plain clothes. He was not wearing a badge or a gun or anything that would identify himself as a law officer. And nor did he introduce himself as such. He didn't say that he was Detective Bice or Mike Bice from the Sheriff's Department. He simply introduced himself to me as Mike Bice. So the fact that I was not made aware that this man was a law officer until after the fact that he was inside my house, does that constitute a lawful entry? I mean, I wouldn't think that it would, but again, I've always been naive to this kind of stuff. But I'm not trying to sound like a smart aleck or anything, but I am trying to understand the knock and talk visits and how they are conducted and how they are successful. And from what I experienced, it appears that the procedure is a plainclothes, unmarked officer gains entry without properly identifying himself, and then once he's in, the rest of you guys bum rush in. I mean, that's what I experienced. So is that your common tactic? And is that lawful? I'll await your response on that. And I should point out at this point now, throughout the remainder of the visit, now these men were at my home for probably an hour or so. Throughout the entire visit, Sheriff Neal, you never spoke a word the entire time. You remained mute. At least there was no conversation between us. And I was kind of thinking at the time that you were probably, a cadet in training or something. You were there strictly as an observer. But Chief Deputy Argo, what little bit he spoke, occasionally here and there, but the great majority, I'd say probably more than 95% of the conversation from that side came from Detective Mike Bice. Now, the way our conversation began, for the first several minutes, Detective Bice, he kept insisting that I knew why they were there, but he wouldn't tell me why. He wanted me to explain to him why, tell us why we're here, and I kept saying, I have no idea. You came to me. I didn't come to you. But over and over again, he kept insisting, I know why they're there, but he's not going to tell me. He wants me to tell him why. And I kept saying, I have no clue. And eventually, the visit went from friendly to dark real fast. Detective Bice, as the visit progressed, he became progressively worse as far as his demeanor goes. He was getting more and more harsh and with his tone and so forth. And but he eventually looked like he was getting a little frustrated, and then he told me in a very direct and stern tone that they had found some marijuana plants growing in a field out behind my yard somewhere. And right away he said, and don't try to lie your way out of it, because we know that you were the one that was growing them. And I was just like, whoa, wait a minute now. It took me a few seconds just to collect myself with that accusation. I was like, wait, no. And, I went on to explain how I'm hardly ever home, and there's a lot of weird things around here going on, and I don't know about, But, and the fact that I'm a truck driver, who, as anybody knows, commercial drivers are subjected to random drug testing at all times, and I'd been through I don't know how many of them. In fact, I think my latest one was about a week and a half before this encounter, and then immediately after this happened, I ran and took another one just to support my innocence. But anyway, no, I tried to explain to him. I said, wait a minute, I don't know what you're talking about here. I'm hardly ever here. And now, as I think about it, I mentioned before how Chief Deputy Argo spoke very little, but what little bit he spoke, he was always very kind and spoke to me in a very polite, respectful tone. And on the other hand, Detective Bice, as the visit progressed, he kept getting worse and worse with his demeanor, getting more and more irate. And it's just, anybody who's ever seen any cop shows knows the role-playing strategy that detectives play when they're trying to interrogate somebody. They play these roles where one plays the role of the bad cop and one plays the role of the good cop. And if the bad cop can't scare a confession out, then maybe the good cop can finesse one out, But it was just so blatantly obvious as this visit went on. And at times I really felt like I was in a bad high school play. It was just so overacted. But, I was going along with it, and Chief Deputy Argo asked me to put my shoes on so they could show me where they found the plants, and I thought at the time that they were still there. I thought that they had just found them and were now knocking on my door about it. But now I found out later, I guess they were discovered a few days before, and they'd already been cleared, and they'd been lying in wait for my return. But anyway, I just remember thinking that they were still out there. I said, yeah, I want to see these, and I put my shoes on, and we went out, and We walked along the base of the hillside. The north side of my lot is a big hillside there, and we walked along the base of that. We went about halfway out to the back of my lot until we came to some landscape ties that I had anchored down when I first set up my lot here. I had divided that back section. And when we came to the landscape ties, we all stopped, and Detective Bice knelt down, and he flattened down the grass right in front of the ties to show me at the base of the hillside there was it was the tail end of a green garden hose that was tucked in there and hidden away between the landscape tie and the grass there. But he flattened down the grass and exposed that to me. And I told him the God's honest truth. I said, that is not mine. I've never seen that before. And of course he called me a liar. And anyway, now, Sheriff Neal, I was going to ask you with those additional details here, if you recollect that at all, of being at my house where there was a marijuana crop growing somewhere out and there was a hose hidden along a landscape ties. Do you recall any of that at all? I'm still kind of anticipating that you're going to say that you don't recollect any of this, but let me proceed. We continued on, and I kind of, at this point, now I understood why I was their suspect with this hose coming onto my lot, and they walked me out to the very back of my lot and then took me back into the woods a little ways, and we came upon this small clearing, and the other end of that garden hose came out of the shrubbery there and tailed out into this clearing, and on that end of the hose was my sprinkler. I had an oscillating sprinkler that goes back and forth. And again, that was the first thing that I told him. I said, that's my sprinkler. And he said, yeah, we know it is. And I said, I'm being as honest with you guys as I can. Yes, that is my sprinkler, but no, that is not my hose. And so anyway, they said they found, I don't know, 60 some odd plants growing back in there. But we eventually went back out into the back of my lot, and we stood in front of my shed back there. And we were back there for quite a long time. And the whole time, of course, Detective Bice's demeanor's getting worse, and he's, throwing more and more threats at me, and he's essentially trying to scare me into giving a false confession. And I just kept saying I don't know anything about it. At that time, I'm looking around and trying to make sense of this. And like one thing that I'm looking at is the fact that at the back end of my house, I have my blue hose that was coiled up and hanging there next, connected to the spigot there. So I could see that somebody was running my hose out there, connecting it to this green one that they brought in. And anybody driving by at that time, anybody driving on the road below, my home was open in view. So anybody driving by could see if my car was here or not, if I was home. But I'm looking at all this, and I felt very violated by this discovery. But at this time, the accusations are being hurled against me, and I'm just trying to, defend myself on that. But I remember I pointed out to him, I was trying to give him some points of logic that would support my innocence claim, and I told him, I said, if that was my hose, like you say it is, then why would I hide it from myself? That makes no sense at all. The only way in and out of my lot is from the front, so there's no foot traffic back there. And I said, why would I hide this from myself? But no, he was dead set. He let me know in no uncertain terms that his investigation was going to start and stop with me. I'm going down for this and nobody else is. And he didn't know how I was going to go down for it, but somehow I would, is what he kept pointing out to me there. And you have to understand the fact that I grew up in a sheriff's family. I was really understanding, trying to, I was telling myself at that time, I said, this guy's really coming off like a jerk, but he's just doing his job. I can't take that personally. I'm sure that in his private life he's a good guy and all. He's just doing his job, and this is the way they got to conduct themselves sometimes. So, I was not taking any of that personally at all. But, at the same time, though, I was trying to let him know, I'm on your side. I want to find out who did this, too. And as we were walking back to my house, Detective Bice began firing a bunch of questions at me. And I don't remember specifically what he was asking me, but something along the lines of, where were you, and how long were you gone, and when did you come back, and blah, blah, blah. I don't know much about civil rights and citizens' rights, but one of the few things that I do know is that a man does not have to answer questions without an attorney present. It's what's called lawyering up, and so basically that's what I did. And I tried to explain to him, I said, don't take it personal, or I'm not afraid to answer any questions at all, but I don't want anything I say to be taken out of context, or I would rather hold off answering any questions until I have an attorney with me. And of course, that got him even more irate, and I remember at that point he jumped in front of me and stopped me as we were walking, almost bumped chest with me, and he jabbed his finger in my face and he was saying, yeah, you do that, you get all the attorneys that you want, it's not going to do you a damn bit of good, And now, even though I lawyered up then and said I didn't want to answer any questions without an attorney, That did not stop him from continuing to hammer away at me with questions and demanding answers. You recall that, don't you, Sheriff Neal? I mean, you were there, although I kind of take it that you're still having difficulty recollecting any of this. Well, that's what happened. I don't know how many times before that visit ended I had to keep reminding Detective Bice that I wasn't going to answer questions without an attorney, because he kept firing away at me. Which leads me to my next question, Sheriff Neal, if you could answer that, is, are citizens' civil rights, are they only applicable upon the officer's discretion? I mean, is law enforcement above the law themselves, and it only applies if they say so? Because I know that, I did say I didn't want to talk without an attorney, answer any questions, but yet he kept asking those questions, and is that lawful? So when we returned to my house, of course I had decided once we returned that I wasn't going to bring these men back inside my house. Sheriff Neal and Chief Deputy Argo maybe, but Detective Bice, no. Nobody who's going to talk to me like that is going to be welcome into my home. So I decided that we would conclude their visit outside my back door, and so I sat on my deck right in front of my back door. I could reach back and touch it from where I was at. And Chief Deputy Argo sat to the left of my door, behind my right shoulder. He was sitting up against the wall here. Sheriff Neal, you were standing behind my left. You were standing at the foot of the steps, of the deck steps there. And Detective Bice stood in front of me and was kind of pacing back and forth. And as I say, his demeanor kept getting worse and worse and worse. And he's going on and on about how he's going to build a case against me and he'll come back later and arrest me. And I kept trying to tell him, you're wasting your time. I'm telling you, I'm not your guy. And at one point, I guess it was the last time where I tried to speak logically with him, was because he was just so irate. He was getting in my face. He was spitting all over me while he was yelling at me. If you want to talk about invading somebody's personal bubble space, I mean, he was right there jamming his finger in my face. I was so surprised that he never actually poked me with it, but he came awfully close many times. But he would go off like that on me, and I tried to explain to him. I said, look, I have been speaking to you in a very polite, respectful, calm tone and manner the entire time you've been here. And I would appreciate it if you would speak to me in that same tone, because I want to find out who did this as much as you did, but we're not going to get anywhere like this. Maybe we'll get somewhere if we can talk on the same calm, passive level. And of course that just made him even more irate. He jumped into my face and he started saying, "You're insulting my intelligence and I don't like it." And of course, a claim like that is impossible. A man has to have intelligence before it could be insulted, but I wasn't going to explain that to him. He was upset enough already, so I let that pass. But I just know that for me, I could not talk to anybody on this level. I felt like I was back in grammar school dealing with the 4th grade school bully all over again, and I can't communicate on that level as much as I would try to. I just cannot deal with people talking to me on that. In that way, all these accusations and threats and in my face and jabbing his finger, So, again, I don't know which question he was trying to demand out of me at that time, but instead of, again, reminding him of my attorney presence request, I just told him at that point, I said, look, I am done talking to you. I cannot communicate with you on this way. I don't like the way you're in my face, jamming your fingers, spitting all over me, I said, no, and at that point, I remember I gestured towards Mr. Argo. I was standing up at this point with my foot up on the deck, so I was facing my back door, but I gestured towards Mr. Argo, and I said, I'll go on talking to the good cop if you want to talk to me, but no, I have nothing left to say to you. And maybe the fact that, I made it obvious that I was wise to their good cop, bad cop game, I don't know, but I just know that there was a period of silence there, and Mr. Bice thought about it for a few minutes, and then his last words to me at that point, he pointed to my back door and he said, "You get your ass back in your house right now before I arrest you and take you to jail." And, of course, I'm no idiot when a very upset, irate cop threatens to arrest you and take you to jail if you don't do what he says. You do what he says, whether you agree or not. So I just shut my mouth right then and did exactly what he ordered me to do. I went back inside my house. And now I went back inside the house. The officers all made their exit. They were walking out. They were almost in my driveway at the end of my house there. I was what I thought was safely back inside my house, and once I was inside, I stuck my head back out and I had a parting shot for him, a parting comment. You have to understand, I was a hard-working guy who in this entire world, this little lot here was all I had to call mine, and I worked so hard to have it that very rarely was I ever home to enjoy it. And once I am home, on that rare occasion, to have this man come to my house and talk to me the way he did and make all these threats and everything, I felt that, I needed to say something to express how appalled I was at the way they behaved themselves, and particularly this Detective Bice. So anyway, I just stuck my head back out the door and I yelled out to him. I said, "Now get off my property." And with that, Detective Bice quickly turned around and, like a racehorse out of the gate, man, boom, he turned and came charging at me with everything he had. I was actually in the process, I was going to be leaning out to close my door, but when he turned around and came charging at me, I just thought, forget the door, and I turned around and continued walking into my house. I expected him to run up to my doorway and then stop and maybe cuss at me some before he left, but that's not what happened. As a matter of fact, what did happen was the very last thing that I thought would happen. Detective Bice actually ran into my house and began assaulting me. And you know what? While I'm still here in this home before I leave, let me take you to the crime scene and I can explain to you exactly what happened and where it happened at. So let's head on over there. Okay, so here's what happened. First of all, I want to point out I'm wearing the same shirt that I was wearing on the night that I was arrested, because I wanted to point out the fact that, as you can see here, Detective Bice tore my shirt when he attacked me from behind. But so here's what happened. I came in upon his orders, demanding that I go back inside my house with the threat of arresting me if I didn't. Once I was in my house, I turned around. Now actually I was about to lean out to close my door, but the first thing I did was I stuck my head out the door like this, and I yelled out to him. I said, "Now get off my property." He took off charging at me like a bat out of hell, so as far as reaching out to close the door, I thought, forget the door. So I just casually turned around and began walking into my house. I got about this far, almost into my kitchen, when the assault took place. Next thing I knew, I was sitting on top of my washing machine. I'm going to reposition the camera so you can see what happened over here. So the next thing I knew, I'm sitting on top of my washing machine. Detective Bice had a hold of my shirt collar and he was choking me out and he had me pinned up against the cabinet. I'm sitting here with my hands in the air saying, "Whoa, this is so not necessary," or whatever it was I was saying. But anyway, he continued to hold me, had me pinned up and choking me out there for several seconds. And the whole time he's like almost nose to nose with me. He looked like a wild dog with rabies. He was breathing real heavy through his clenched teeth, and he had all this saliva coming out of the corner of his mouth, all foaming up. And anyway, after several seconds, when he finally let go of me, he did so by quickly pulling me forward and slamming me into the cabinet again. And that was his way of letting go of me. Now, Sheriff Neal, by this time, you and your Chief Deputy John Argo had both returned. You were both inside my house now, and you were both standing over here at about where the assault began. So when Detective Bice slammed me against the cabinet one last time, he backed away to where you men were. So all three of these officers are standing here. I'm sitting here just as stunned as can be, with my hands in the air, looking at them, waiting for them to instruct me to do something. What do they want me to do now? The three of them just stood there looking stupid at me. So just very slow, I wanted to make sure I didn't make any sudden moves, but just very slowly, I slid down off the washing machine, continued to hold my hands in the air, continued to look at them, waiting for some instruction. Again, nothing's being said, they're all just standing there looking at me. So I took it that they wanted me to assume the arrest position, as I've seen enough cop shows to know that. So from this point, after not getting any instruction for them, I just very slowly turned to my left, and I'll have to reposition the camera here. I just slowly turned to my left and planted my hands over my doorway here, and I stood here in the arrest position just like this. Now keep in mind, the whole time that this was happening, my back door was still wide open. That's a piece of relevance that I'll explain a little bit later. But I stood here like this for several seconds, and then Detective Bice eventually walked over, grabbed me by the back of my belt and by my shoulder, and as hard as he could, he spun and slammed me face first down onto the floor. On the throw to the floor, my elbow hit the washing machine, which jacked it up, and to this day I still have problems with it. I can't rest my elbow on any kind of table or surface. I always have to cup it with my hand anytime I do that. But yeah, it swelled up and I could feel some floating bone spurs running around in there, but yeah, it was messed up for a while. So now I'm laying face down on the floor, where Detective Bice harshly jumps down onto me. I'll do another camera switch here. I'm laying here on the floor like this, and Detective Bice grabs my right arm And I assumed that he was pulling it back so he could handcuff me, but no, first he raised my arm and twerked it and bent it the way that an arm is not intended to bend. Not to mention he was also bending my hand into my arm. He sprained my rib. I thought he was going to break it, but he sprained it. But let's just say that he was obviously trying to force me into resisting arrest. And all I know is that, first of all, I haven't been in a fight, any kind of physical confrontation, since I was about 14 years old, since I was in junior high school. But forget about the fact that he was a cop, just the fact that there was 3 of them, and 2 of them standing over us both had guns on their hips. I wasn't going to do anything stupid. So regardless of how much he tried to force me into resisting, I just laid here and bellowed out in pain. That's all I could do. And but he eventually pulled that arm back. He clawed into my bicep because I landed on this arm. So when he was trying to pull it, I pulled it out and gave it to him. But he clawed into my arm here and slapped the cuffs on me, squeezed them on as tight as they could go. And then as he was getting off of me, he basically gave me like a palm punch into my back. You know, as his way of getting up. So they then set me into an upright position. I'm sitting here handcuffed. Fortunately, the fact that Chief Argo was playing the good cop, he did loosen my handcuffs for me so they weren't crushing my wrist. But anyway, Chief Deputy John Argo sat next to me to my left. Sheriff Neal, I'm not sure where you were at by this time. I think you were in and out of here. But the whole time, though, Detective Bice is standing in front of me. He's kind of pacing back and forth. He's still breathing like a mad dog, heavy through his clenched teeth. But he eventually stopped and stood over me and began taunting me. He's standing over me like, you know, yeah, get off your property, we'll get off your property and take you with us. And he said a lot of things where he was obviously trying to provoke me into saying something that would allow him, you know, give him a reason to smack me around some more, I guess. I don't know, but I just didn't say another word to him. But this is the kind of men we have on the force. When a guy's sitting on the ground, handcuffed, with a couple of armed officers close by, that's when he's going to stand over me and taunt me, okay? Only when a guy's totally defenseless. And I might also point out, never throughout the entire visit, from the time that they arrived to the time they hauled me out of here, never once did any of you 3 men ever utter the words, "You're under arrest," to me. Nor did anybody ever read me my Miranda rights. Now, I would take this time to ask you, Sheriff Neal, again, is that some kind of a standard procedure? You feel that you don't have to read citizens their Miranda rights when they're being arrested? I thought that was a part of the law. But again, does that only apply when the officer's at their discretion or what? Because nobody ever read me my rights. Nobody ever told me I was under arrest. They handcuffed me. A uniformed officer eventually arrived and hauled me off to jail. So again, I would ask, as I've been asking all along, Sheriff Neal, you must remember this, but let me see if I can accurately predict what your response would be to that. You would say, I wasn't there. No way could I have been there. Because if I was ever around under my watchful eye, never would any of my officers ever violate any of my citizens' civil rights. If I was there, I would have never allowed that to happen, so therefore I wasn't there. Is that what you're going to say? Did I accurately predict your response? I'll get back to that a little bit later. So I got hauled into jail. I was in there for almost 24 hours, and I won't go into all the details of that experience. I'll just say that the jailhouse conditions there in Rhea County, Tennessee, very, very inhumane. And again, I won't go into the details about it, but what I do recall from that time is when they hauled me in there, I was limping from having my toes stomped on. And while I was being strip searched, which had to be the most humiliating experience I'd ever been through in my life, I will definitely spare you the graphic details of that. But I remember when I was asked to remove my socks, and I explained to the officer there, I said, I'm going to have to do this slowly and carefully because my toe's been stomped on. I'm in a lot of pain here. But I slowly removed my sock, and when I examined my toe at that point, it was real red, but I didn't notice any swelling or anything. I thought at that point it would be okay. However, the next day, I was pacing around my cell waiting to get bonded out of there, and the more I walked around, the more I was limping, and the more my foot hurt. And I eventually sat down and removed my sock again. Well, now I discovered the whole area, the whole surface below the nail had turned almost black. It was a very dark purplish black. And when I discovered that, the first thing I did, I summoned the jailer. He was an older man. I brought him over and showed it to him. I'd already told him about how I was assaulted. And he looked at it and he cringed and he said, "Ooh, that looks terrible." And I said, "Can I get some medical attention?" And he just blew me off. He said, "Nah, we don't have a medical staff here." And he left. And then a little bit later, another jailer, it was this big burly woman who was pushing a medicine cart to give to the other inmates there. And I summoned her over and showed it to her, and she too cringed, and she said, "Yeah, you're probably going to lose that nail." And I said, "Well, I'm in a lot of pain here. Do you have anything I could take to alleviate this excruciating pain I'm suffering through here?" And she just said, "Nah, I can't help you out," and kept going. And so I did eventually have to go see a podiatrist and have it removed and all that. But anyway, that's a different story. I know that now when I was finally released, I didn't get all my stuff back. And I don't even know if they inventoried it or not. If they did, I know I pointed out what was missing when they gave me back my stuff. And when I pointed out what was missing, they just said, "Ah, well, some things don't last around here." That was the whole attitude. "Our gain, your loss, goodbye." So that's just my forewarning to anybody who gets assaulted and gets thrown into the jail there. Don't expect to get any medical attention, and don't expect to get all your stuff back. Now, after that, I knew that if I was going to be eradicated of all this, I was going to have to go out and investigate this myself and find the culprit myself. Their investigation already stopped with me, and so I had a pretty good idea. I know that I mentioned my cousin who lived here at the time, and he always had a lot of friends in his room there and was playing with the computers. Well, he owned and operated a couple of nightclubs at that time down in Chattanooga, and so most of these guys were his employees. And when I would be leaving town for long periods, I know that I had that discussion with my cousin in the presence of all of his friends that, yeah, I'm going to be gone for a few months or however long, you know. So the fact that I was away from here a lot and nobody was watching my place, that was not a secret. And I kind of later realized, too, that if anybody wanted to grow marijuana plants around here, they couldn't have picked a more ideal location where they had access to my water spigot and nobody's here watching the place. And the biggest discovery that I made was a trail that went from the road down below up to the back of my lot, directly across from where the plants were growing. And across the road, there's another little hidden road back there that goes into a little private cemetery. I've seen cars go back there before, which I assume was probably young lovers looking for a private place to park. But anyway, I knew that people could park back there without being seen, and whoever the culprit was obviously cut this. It's the only way that they could make their way up to the back of my lot without being seen by anybody around here, my neighbors. And upon making that discovery, I immediately called my attorney and told him about it. And I said, "I know that they usually take a bunch of pictures of their crime scenes and all that, so get in touch with the department and make a request to get their aerial photographs." And so he looked into that, and the response that he got from the Rhea County Sheriff's Department was that they had conveniently not taken any aerial photographs. Otherwise, they may have seen something that would have led their investigation to another direction. But of course, that would have taken far too much time. It would have been too much tedious work, and you know, I'm the guy that's going to go down for this. So anyway, but these efforts that I was going to make towards doing my own investigation, I was going to drop the word to my cousin and say, "Tell all your friends that I found a bunch of marijuana plants and I've already bagged them up, and just see what kind of reaction you give. I'll find out whose this is." But that effort was thwarted when on the next edition of the newspaper, the local newspaper here comes out on Wednesdays and Saturdays only. I got arrested on a Thursday night. I got out on Friday night, Saturday morning on the front page of the paper. Big color photograph of Detective Bice with another sheriff's officer holding up a big marijuana plant. Article about my arrest in which Detective Bice reported to the press, who put on the front page of the paper that these plants were found growing in my lot, and the hose used in the operation was connected to my home. Neither one could be further from the truth, but anybody who looks at that is going to agree that, oh yeah, they've got their guy this time, you know. And so being indicted on the front page of the paper was kind of hard for me to do any undercover investigating on all this. But something that I found very curious about that article, though, it mentioned that they had been doing a lot of marijuana eradication efforts. And Detective Bice, it closes out with a quote from him saying, "This time we got the grower." And I just kind of thought, what's he mean this time? So that prompted me to go to the library and research the recent back issues of the newspaper. And what I discovered was that in most of the recent issues, they all contain big articles about a big marijuana eradication effort that took place. Apparently, they were finding marijuana crops growing throughout the county, But all these articles had the same conclusion. No arrests were made. They're finding the crops, but they're not finding the growers. And I'm sure that that was becoming more and more frustrating. Now I was beginning to understand why I was arrested in such an overzealous manner. I mean, they were getting tired of these articles saying no arrests were being made. Maybe that was an embarrassment to them, but no way in hell were they going to allow another no arrest made article to appear. Now, as I continued my investigation, when I finally obtained a copy of the arrest report, there was a few things that I discovered in it that was rather peculiar. For one thing, although there were 3 sheriff's officials at my house that night, only 2 of them were mentioned in the report. The arresting officer, Mike Bice, and Chief Deputy John Argo. And I was so new to the community then I didn't know who was who, but I just thought, well, there was 3 men at my house that night. Why isn't the 3rd officer mentioned? Why is his name mysteriously absent in this report? Well, I kind of figured it out later on. You see, sometime after all this, I saw there was a big article in the newspaper. I don't even remember what it was about, but it featured a big publicity headshot of our beloved sheriff, Mike Neal. And as soon as I saw that face in the paper right away, I knew. I said, that's him! That was the 3rd officer at my house that night. It was none other than the sheriff himself. Man, they must have really wanted me. And so, see if I can understand this, Sheriff Neal, as far as why your name was left off the arrest report. And this may also explain why you never spoke a word to me. You remained mute the whole time you were here. But it seems logical that if by chance I could ever prove that your men violated my civil rights and made a very unlawful arrest, ran into my house and assaulted me and all that, if I could ever prove that, and it's in the documentation that you were there and a witness to it and under your command and allowed it to happen, well then, you'd have a whole lot to answer to now, wouldn't you, Sheriff Neal? That makes sense. Now I understand why your name is mysteriously absent from the arrest report. Now, the more I researched and investigated this case, the more enlightenment I gained as to how and why I was arrested and the way I was arrested and so forth. And the first bit of enlightenment that hit me, about 2 weeks after I was arrested, there was an article in the paper. It came out on September 1st, 2004, and it's titled, Sheriff's Department Harvests More Marijuana on Grandview. Now in it, let me quote here, it says, perhaps one reason for the increased marijuana eradication activity is because increased efforts could result in more funding from the Appalachian High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area's Executive Committee, of which our beloved Sheriff Neal is a member. Now, as soon as I read that, I realized that's what this was all about. My arrest was politically motivated. They're going for this quota here to gain these funds, and what way to do it? Grab and arrest whoever you have to, guilty or not. We got to get these funds in so we can take out and wine and dine our wives and our prostitute girlfriends. Or I shouldn't say that. That's an entirely different allegation, not mine. But anyway, let me move on here. Again, I began to get some more answers after I finally obtained a copy of my arrest report. And among the various peculiarities I discovered when I read through it, they had tacked on an additional charge. Besides being charged with growing marijuana, I also discovered they added the additional charge of evading arrest. I'm like, I did? How did I do that? I did exactly what he told me to do. I went back to my house when he ordered me to, threatened to arrest me if I didn't. According to Detective Bice, he writes, quote, I told Mr. Corbin he was under arrest. Mr. Corbin then took off running into his trailer and tried to shut the door. Obviously, what Detective Bice didn't realize when he wrote this report is that mobile home back doors, as opposed to most standard doors, mobile home back doors open out, not in. So it would be physically impossible. I would really love to have heard Detective Bice try to explain that in court, how I ran into my house and then tried to shut my outward door. And while he's at it, maybe he could try to explain how it is that the scuff marks on the four that his boots left will show that he obviously came running in from the front of my house, like where his cars were in my parking lot, in my driveway where he was going, as opposed to the backside where the plants were found and where most of the interrogation took place. How is it, place me to the front of the house, how was it that I took off running from the front of the house? Because there's obviously where you came running in from. Now, it gets better than that. In my frivolous attempt to seek justice, Once this case was resolved, I immediately filed charges against the department. And I don't know exactly what this is called. It's a document that comes from their attorney, and it's in response to the charges that I have made. And some interesting things in here. Now on page 2, this is Detective Bice's response through his attorney. Okay, here it is. Quote, plaintiff evaded arrest by attempting to run to his trailer, but was apprehended by Detective Bice at or near the threshold of his trailer. So now he's denying that he ever went into my house. Obviously, Detective Bice can't keep track of which lies he told and when and to cover up what. And of course, that is obviously definitely doesn't match up with the scuff marks that his boots left 5 feet into my house either. Now, there's something else interesting in this, and now it's on the same page a little above it. It's claimed that the marijuana plants were found growing on a path leading directly to plaintiff's trailer, and the plaintiff being me. Sheriff Neal, please, 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 for the sake of the integrity and the outstanding reputation that your department that you are the sheriff of uphold and maintain, if you are man enough to respond to this and give a reply post, please look back into your photo files back to August of 2004 and bring up the photo files of my case. And please, for your own reputation and your department's, post on there and show us where there were marijuana plants growing on a trail leading directly to my home, let alone anywhere in my lot. Show me any photo showing marijuana plants growing in my lot. And while you're at it, let's see the photo of the hose used in the operation connected to my spigot, to my home. And also you might find in there, according to my witness on the scene, when your investigators unlawfully opened my shed and poked their noses inside there and looked inside my shed back there. And as I think about it, now my witness on the scene there at the time was the property owner, and these are things that he reported to me, such as he saw for himself that the ground where these plants were found and where they were eradicating them was all very, very wet and very saturated. And so much so that it prompted one of the investigators on the scene to say something along the lines of, "It looks like we just missed our culprit. They were obviously here earlier this morning watering." Now, according to the dates and so forth, this happened on a Tuesday. I had left home on Sunday afternoon, and at that time I was up in Ohio with my truck driving work, and I have a GPS printout of my truck to prove that, along with my evidence, other files that I have. Now, my next set of questions for you, Sheriff Neal, they pertain to your chosen narcotics detective, Mike Bice. I'd like to know, and I think your citizens should know, these charges that I filed against your department in regards to your detective unlawfully assaulting me. I'm not the first one who's filed such charges against the department in regards to Detective Bice, am I? And I'm not the second, nor the third, nor the fourth, nor the fifth. If you could, please tell us, how many times has anybody or has anyone filed charges against your department in regards to Detective Bice? And I know that you guys, you weasel out and win all of them, but just tell us how many times have charges been filed. Okay? And let me bring up a few more newspaper articles regarding your chosen detective. Again, as part of my research, okay, now this one was dated in the local newspaper here, the Herald News, January 7th, 2001. Now this one's titled, "Prisoner's Jaw Broken During Scuffle with Deputy." And the defendant claimed that Mr. Bice, who was then a deputy, attacked him unprovoked and broke his jaw. And he also denied the drug charges that he was arrested for. Well, I certainly have no problem believing that. Another article dated May 23rd, this is 4 months later. And this suspect was apprehended by Deputy Bice and was later determined that he suffered a broken wrist during his apprehension. Now, what I find very ironic about such articles is in all of these, whoever the spokesperson is at the department who the press contacts, but their defense is they always claim that the suspect broke their own bones. And their general reaction is, we don't know how they broke their own bones, but we didn't do it, they did. And, how believable is that anybody would go to such an extreme to break their own bones just to frame up a cop? And especially, how ironic is it that it's always the same cop? But there are some other articles in here. There's one more here that I want to bring up. There's a lot of similarities between this description and what happened to me when I was arrested. This one's dated January the 18th, 2004. This one's titled, Deputies Seize 8 pounds of pot and 8 guns. Now, I noticed some interesting similarities between this arrest and mine, and here Detective Bice claims that he ordered the suspect to drop a container that had marijuana in it, and that the suspect threw it and then ran towards his trailer, just like he claims I did. And that he tackled the man, quote, as he turned towards him. Now that is about as physically possible as me running into my house and closing my outward door. This man is running away from him, and then he turned towards him while he's running away. I assume that that explanation is there for whatever frontal injuries I'm sure the man endured, as Detective Bice wailed on him, I'm sure, but that would explain it. Now, you know, some people learn from their mistakes and some don't. Now, these articles that I read to you, they dated back to 2001, and my ordeal, that all happened back in 2004. This is all 9, 10, 12 years ago, whatever. But this is still going on today. And just in recent months, I know of a couple of cases going on right now with the charges against the department. If you'll go online and type in the keywords, Dade County inmate who led police on chase says deputies beat him. And this is from the Chattanooga Times Free Press website. And read that over, and in there, I know that in his, I've read somewhere in there his complaint where he says it was 2 Rhea County sheriff's officers who beat on him. And in here it says that Detective Bice, one of the officers on the scene, said he hadn't heard about the complaint, but when he arrived, the police had already captured him and that he was lying face down with his hands under him. And knowing his MO that he will only assault people who are defenseless, yeah, that's the time when he would assault them. Now it also says in there that Sheriff Mike Neal and his right-hand man, Chief Deputy John Argo, were both on vacation at the time. The 2 top men on the force took their vacations on the same week. So, Sheriff Neal, should I ask, who did you leave in charge? And please don't tell me you put Detective Bice in charge. There's another article in there, it's a follow-up to that came out a couple weeks later. That one's titled, Rhea County Sheriff Hasn't Probed Inmate Beating Allegation. Now basically what this article just says is that Sheriff Neal hasn't done a thing about these charges, that he hasn't looked into it at all, and he claims that he's not going to until he has to. But you can look that over. Now there was one more that came out just recently in the local newspaper, the Rhea Herald News. This one's dated July 31st. This was a month later. $2 million federal suit filed against Rhea. And in this article, the allegation is that Detective Bice, or in here he's referred to as investigator Mike Bice, pistol whipped the man twice in the head. He was also tasered, and the deputies kicked him a couple of times. So now something else that I think is worth pointing out regarding online websites. There's one in particular called Topics with an X, T-O-P-I-X. And it's a blog posting, and I guess every town has one, but if you go to the Dayton Topics, I have discovered a lot of things written in there. Detective Bice, according to what's been written in there, at one time he broke somebody's neck down in Graysville, and there's claims in there that he beats his wife all the time, and another one that he got a 16-year-old girl pregnant and forced her to have an abortion, and just a lot of ugly stuff in there. And I know that that's hearsay. Anybody can post whatever they want to on that. But knowing the characters I do, I don't doubt any of it. And again, now I've presented you the facts, the newspaper articles and all that stuff. But among those that would be classified as hearsay, I know that just around town, without even mentioning him myself, I would hear things. And among the things that I have heard, one of them had to do, I remember I was at this place where I was working at, and there was a couple of co-workers talking together, and I heard Mike Bice's name mentioned, so I immediately tuned in. And the conversation was, one was telling the other one about how Detective Bice and this other, I think they said he was a former sheriff's officer, named BJ. I think Johnson, it was a common last name. But anyway, a former sheriff's officer named BJ who lived in Meigs County, and they were saying how Mike Bice and this BJ Johnson had their own meth lab out there at BJ's place in Meigs County. And I thought, that's kind of hard to believe. The guy's a narcotics detective. But then later on somewhere else I heard about how a judge had ordered him to take time off from work and enter an anger management program, which sounds very, very believable. But the story was that he had actually doctored the documents that he needed to, and instead he spent that time, he went into a drug rehab to dry out. So evidently he has his own share of drug problems. I wonder where he gets them. So yeah, lots of stories like that. But again, that's hearsay, and I want to clarify that. But what I'm getting to here is, the questions that I have for you, Sheriff Neal, regarding your detective, I can just make it real short and simple and just ask you one question. Why do you continue to employ him on your force? You obviously condone what he does, and in spite of all these different charges that have been made and different complaints, that's the big question I think everybody has who's ever encountered him. Why is he a man like this on the force? This man who has, and sometimes he displays it, his badge, which he takes as some kind of a license to be the county bully and beat up on people, whether provoked or not, and just makes no sense. Okay, I'm here with a neighbor who has his own story to tell you, his own nightmare that he endured at the hands of the Rhea County Sheriff's Department. So, what happened to you? I understand that you allowed a homeless family to come live with you for a while?
Yeah, exactly. I was approached with a homeless family, a lady and her son that didn't have a place to live, and they were begging me to rent them a room, and I said, well, no, but you're welcome to stay in my spare bedroom, until you could do something better. And that's kind of the way that happened.
So what happened?
Well, after a few days, I came home early from work one day, and there was some drugs usage going on in my home, which I do not allow. And when I explained that to them, that wasn't allowed in my home, they continued to use the drugs, and so I asked them to leave. They wouldn't leave. Then some drugs were laid on my kitchen table, which I confiscated, put in my bedroom in a locked box, and called the police.
You call the police or the Sheriff's Department?
Well, the Sheriff's Department, yeah. It's the Rhea County Sheriff's Department, and they show up and wanted to know what was going on. I explained the situation, told them I need these people out of my home and why. Opened the locked box. As soon as I opened the locked box, they said, oh, so you're in possession of narcotics.
You were getting the drugs to give to the cops?
Yes. And so they arrested me. Did not read me my rights, did not tell me that anything about why I was being arrested or anything other than the drugs were in my possession, in my room, in my lockbox.
As you were getting them to give to them?
Right.
Right. Did you by chance get the arresting officer's name?
No, I didn't get his name, but he's a little bitty short sawed-off guy.
Little short guy, that we all know who that is.
Yeah.
Well, I do appreciate your story. I know there's about 1,000 or million more of them out there if I was to scour the town, but I just wanted to get one story. And thank you very much for your time for telling me that.
You're welcome.
So now let me try to wrap all this up I'll try to briefly explain to you the outcome of all this and how this all turned out. I reluctantly agreed to a reduced plea deal. What I told my attorney, first of all, let me give you my mindset here. I thought, if the way I was arrested is any indication of how the justice system works around here, I want nothing to do with their courthouse and their trials. I kind of anticipated that it would probably be a kangaroo court. And later I learned, I don't know if it's true or not, but I was informed that Detective Bice's wife works for one of the judges. I think she's one of the judge's secretaries or something, and probably the one who would have presided over my case. And I told my attorney, I said, if there's any way we can avoid going to trial, again, at that time I had very long hair. It was about halfway down my back. I thought, I'm going to be marched into court with long hair and accused of growing marijuana, and it's going to be my word against these 3 local cops who are going to lie through their teeth. What chance do I have? So I said, let's try to avoid going to trial, and if there's any way we can keep this, I have a spotless criminal record, and I want to keep it that way. If there's any way we can keep my record clean and have this expunged without going to trial. So the reduced deal, I accepted it under one condition, and here's how I felt like I got double-crossed in this whole deal. I told my attorney, and they wanted to reduce it down to some simple misdemeanor. I said, I'll agree to whatever reduced deal we can work out that will meet these, I want to make sure that my life isn't ruined here. But I said, under the condition that I am not going to admit guilt to anything, even a simple reduced misdemeanor charge. I am not going to admit guilt to anything that I didn't do. As long as I don't have to admit guilt to anything. I also knew that as soon as this closed out, I was going to file my charges against them, and I wanted to make sure I had a strong case. So I said, I am not going to admit guilt to anything that I did not do. And my attorney then assured me, he said, that's part of the deal. You don't have to admit guilt to anything. And so I accepted it. And then after I filed my charges against him, now this attorney, I lost all respect if there ever had any for any attorneys. This man basically took my money and ran with it. But I told him everything that had happened, and he said, oh yeah, we can win this case. He said, yeah, we'll get $1 million. I said, I don't want money. All I want is justice. I want Detective Bice to serve time behind bars like he should be for doing what he's doing. That's all I care about. But that attorney, after he took my money, later on told me, he says, well, you may not have stood before the judge and admitted guilt, but by accepting the reduced deal, that is technically considered an admission of guilt. I was like, what do you mean technically? So that, and then the other thing that ended up ruining this case was the fact that I had a witness, a neighbor, and I mentioned before about how when the assault took place, my back door was wide open the whole time. My neighbor up the hill peeked out his window a few times and saw some things that would have definitely proven my case. He mentioned that he looked out the window once and he saw that we were all gathered around my back door and I was sitting just right in front of my back door. Obviously, I was not in a running distance, as Detective Bice later claimed. But then he said he looked out later while the assault was taking place inside my house, inside the open door, and his wife was there with him, and it even prompted her to say, why are they beating up on him when he doesn't seem to be resisting in any way? So anyway, as this was nearing our court time, and I was getting geared up for it, and he told me, feel free to put me on the witness list. He also told me that he knew who Detective Bice was by sight because he'd had a previous bad encounter with him. But days before we were set to go to trial, apparently, when my attorney called him, he claimed that he didn't see anything because there was evidently a imaginary tree that blocked his view. But it leads me to think, and I should ask, this would be my next question for you, Sheriff Neal. By any chance, did you or any of your men happen to pay a visit to my neighbor and instill upon him some form of court amnesia? Somebody convinced him that he didn't see anything? Might that have happened? I wonder. I made one last-ditch effort to seek justice, and that was I wrote a letter and explained the whole story, and I mailed a copy to the local FBI office, and I also mailed the same copy to the local TBI office, Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. And one of them, I believe he was from the state office, called me back, or he called me, and he said, we received your letter, we're very interested in talking and discussing this with you. I want to arrange a meeting with you and some FBI agents. He says, I'm going to be busy for the next couple of weeks, but when I come back, I'll give you a call and we'll arrange a meeting. And about a month went by and I called him back and he got kind of rude with me on the phone. He said, I told you I'd call you when I was ready for you. And I said, all right, well, I know you said a couple of weeks. I thought maybe you're waiting for me to call you back. No, I'll call you when I'll call you. That was the last I heard of it, so that was the end of that. So with all that over and done with, once I realized there is no justice, I thought, well, there's only one other thing that I can do, and that's try to alert and warn my fellow citizens around me to watch out. In a non-communist country, we do have what's called the freedom of speech. We are free to express ourselves. So I did so by creating a pamphlet. I called it Dayton Today. And what I did, once a year down at the courthouse, big, huge Scopes Festival. And people come in from all over for that. So as the Scopes Festival was approaching, I made this up. I told my story in different chapters, exactly as I'm explaining to you now. I went out there, and among all the hustle and puzzle, I had this big bag of these things, and I was passing them out to everybody. I was out there for 2 days. Sometimes the same day and sometimes the next day, a lot of people came to me saying, I read your story, and I know it is oh so true, because let me tell you what happened to me, or let me tell you what happened to my brother, or my uncle. Everybody had their own horror story that was as bad, if not worse than mine, and again, I had no problem believing any of it. But the one interesting encounter that I had that was opposed to it, I remember, was this man, and he came out of the courthouse. I think he was one of the court officials in there. But this man comes out and he approaches me and he said, yeah, I read your story, and you better hope that they don't drag your butt into court and sue you for slander and defamation of character and a bunch of other things. And I told the man, I said, I welcome them to do that. I beg of them to do that. I defy them to do that. Maybe that's why I was out there passing these out. I wanted the opportunity to tell my story in court. And as I told that man, I said, you tell these guys, I would love for them to take me into court and prove that there is any one word that I wrote in here that is a lie and that is false. If they can prove anything that I wrote is a false and is a lie, I welcome them to do it. And so with that, the man just kind of shut up and went back inside. So I'm going to wrap it up now. I want to thank you all for your time and hearing my story. Every bit of it is true. In a case in which my attorney described it as far as the evidence against me, he said it was vaguely circumstantial at best, but still this is what I endured. This was my experience. And but I want to thank you all, and thank you, Sheriff Mike Neal, and I guess I should probably apologize to you. I know I did answer some of those questions for you that I had asked regarding the procedures of knock and talk visits and so forth. But I did leave you with a wealth of questions, and if you are man enough to reply and post your response, I would love to hear your answers to the best of your ability, as I think all of your citizens would love to hear your response to these questions and allegations. And for the citizens of Rhea County, let me reiterate, excuse me, what I said in the very beginning when I asked you to please keep in mind as you heard my story. I hope you did. Know and understand that what happened to me can happen to any one of you, and for many of you it already has. And so the best advice that I could give you, I know it can be expensive, but please do yourself a favor and invest in some home video surveillance equipment. You need to know what's going on around your house when you're not there, and in the unlikely, but yet it has happened to many of us, in the event that you should suffer through a home invasion. You know, unfortunately for me, I made my investment a little too late. If I had invested a little earlier, there would be some former law officer sitting behind bars right now. There would be a whole different outcome to this story. But unfortunately for me, I made that investment a little too late. But I know that I've always kept my home video camera close to my door in case I should get another odd visit. I would advise you to do the same thing. I always keep a loaded audio cassette recorder out in my car in the event I should get pulled over. And just know that these people who your tax dollars pay to protect and serve you in Rhea County, that's not it. They're out to hurt you. They are out to hurt you physically, mentally, financially. They're out to take from you what they can. They're not going to protect you. And if you think you stand a chance in court, it kind of reminds me of there's an old George Carlin quote that's quite true about telling the truth in courts and cops lying in court. He says that that's part of their job. It's to protect and to serve and to perjure themselves whenever it'll support the state's case. So, and you know, now that I think about it, nowadays even cell phones have video technology. So anytime you see Rhea County Sheriff's officials conducting any business in your neighborhood, or if you're out and about somewhere and you see them conducting their business, stand a safe distance back and turn on that video device in your camera and capture it. You never know what might transpire, but it might be something that will protect your fellow citizens in a court of law. Maybe. You never know. But anyway, I want to thank you again for your time, and I guess as Red Skelton used to say, good night and may God bless.